Hello and welcome back. What an extraordinary panel that we just completed. And I want to express my gratitude now to our last three panelists. And I'm very excited now to welcome our next three panelists to what is, I'm very sorry to say, the last panel of our conference. Panel 7 is entitled Interconvictional Bridge Building as a Diplomatic Response to the Ecological Crisis. And now that we have heard from a dynamic group of panelists from North America, we are going to travel across the Atlantic to Europe and to hear a different set of voices. And the practice of interconvictional bridge building has emerged in Europe out of the work of interfaith and intercultural groups who privilege the beliefs of agnostics and atheists as equally valid and valuable to those of practitioners of religious traditions. This inclusive and egalitarian understanding of community building opens the door to looking at the moral and ethical motivations which drive diplomatic efforts in an entirely different light. Our speakers for this panel include three figures who have played key roles in the dissemination of interconvictional work in France, the UK, and across the European Union. Following the three presentations of our speakers, questions will be posed to our panelists, which have been submitted by our audience members via the Q&A portal, which you can find at the bottom right hand of your screen. Please submit your questions as they occur to you so that we can pose them to our panelists. So let's now turn to our speakers. Our first speaker now is François Becker. He is a professor emeritus at the University of Strasbourg and former director of its School of Engineering in Telecommunications and Physics. He is a physicist whose research engages geophysics, remote sensing, nuclear physics, theoretical physics, and interconvictional relations. Professor Becker is the former Secretary General of the European Network Church on the Move, and he represented at the Council of Europe. He is the co-founder of G3I, an international, intercultural, and interconvictional group whose members include both practitioners of religious traditions and secular people. And he is the author of multiple publications, including the edited volume, Becoming Citizens of a Plural Europe, Interconvictional Space and Practice, published by Publibook in 2016. François joins us today from Saint-Jean-de-Luz, near the French-Spanish border. Welcome, François.
Welcome, thank you. I'm pleased to be here. So I really speak about the way I am interested in such a topic. I must say, to begin with, by saying that the research I have undertaken is not, since my retirement from university, has not been stimulated by the environmental crisis, nor have its priority changed with it. So the question is, by which this research has been stimulated. First, it was by the great diversity of tension and conflicts within plural societies generated by diversity of culture, religion, philosophy, political vision. That have also an impact on environmental crisis. As I was interested by a way to improve in such a society, living together and social cohesion while respecting human rights. But this interest was also stimulated by the wide interest that they met, and also by the support of the Council of Europe, who invited G3I to work on its white paper for intercultural dialogue, which is of interest for this topic, and also who ordered its research on the role of religions and current of thought and social cohesion in Europe, as well as implementation of interconvictional spaces and practices in Europe, enabling citizens to contribute to political life, as said by David, and also our work on an European Charter for interconvictionality. Now, the first outcome is that conviction is identified as an important driver of the diversity. And the definition from Bernard Quelquejeu and G3I is that a conviction is a quiet sense of the mind supported by justification just sufficient to lead to adhesion. So look at the word, acquiescence of the mind. This is not a belief, nor necessarily truth. Supported by justification sufficient, that means that may not be quite a problem to lead adhesion. That is, that they are an acceptable step in the search of truth. So it is important to take into account the nature It might be religious, atheistic, political, etc., etc. Their depth, their conviction might be weak, not so important, but it might be also deep, strong. The level of validation, well, I'm not sure of it, or I'm strongly sure of it. And then its dynamics, as I will show in this slide. Now, as a physicist, said by David, I am interested to present information on graph. So I will put on the ordinate the depth and the strength of the conviction, and on the abscissa, I will show its validation, the strength of its validation. For here, it's not so validated. I have no so much reason to believe it. Here, it is very strong. So you start with an inherited, that means an a priori conviction. And this a priori conviction is done by the family and the social environment. So its validation is not so important. It's confidence on the family and social environment. But as a child, you find it very strong. But now, during your life, because of you many contact with the others, and this contact through interaction with them and interconvictional dialogue, then you get to emancipate, to have this conviction your own by education, confrontation versus people. Then you get the personal conviction when you're adult, adhesion, conscious. So that conviction are stronger, they might be shared, and then the steps is much larger. But then this is very different from what we call an opinion. Generally, the validation is very low. It's become from the newspaper or from what we heard in the street. And generally, the belief should be really weak. But, if you do not want to have interaction, if you don't want to really evolve with your conviction, then it's very dangerous because you go to sectarism and to fanatism. You believe something which is not strongly validated, and this is very dangerous in our society. Now, as you see in this graph, you have here groups that can be formed with shared conviction. But again, when you have your personal conviction, if you think that you get the truth, it becomes again very dangerous, because then you go to fanatism, ideology, and say that you are the best, and may generate a lot of conflicts. Now, you don't see the truth in this graph, because truth generally is just a point you want to look at to get the truth, but you never have the truth. So interaction between conviction is a strong engine for deepening conviction, hence the word interconvictional, which is much wider than interface because it includes all conviction. And this engine works through an interconvictional process and needs to be instituted with appropriate institution, sometimes by law, and should be practiced in appropriate space to be created. And then this interaction are building bridge. This interconvictional process is based on 3 types of interconvictional dialogues. At the personal level, you have what we call non-conclusive interconvictional dialogue. It should be practiced by anyone. And at all levels of decision-making process, you have the pre-decisional interconvictional dialogue, which can be held in appropriate open place and is open to all interested people. Industry, farmers, consumers, traders, municipalities, etc. And you have decisional interconvictional dialogue in place, officially in charge of making decisions, and is open to officially mandated persons. Now, just give a few details on this. At the personal level, the non-conclusive interconvictional dialogue is just to get to know each other, discovering each other's conviction without fearing them, accepting mutual confrontation, but no judgment, no will to convince the other. Now, at all levels of decision-making, the pre-decisional interconvictional dialogue is to make proposals of decision to solve a problem with their arguments and consequences. If you take this decision, this is what will happen, etc. And the decisional interconvictional dialogue as a place to make decisions regarding this problem, but based on the previous proposal with argument. So this is the way to have all people participating through this pre-decisional interconvictional dialogue. And this makes a bridge. So the resultant strategy is threefold. First, at individual level, you have the person, and at the collective level of the organization, you have what happened within each organization and what happens between each organization. So at the individual level, this is very early on in school and then in university, it is necessary to educate people, to welcome the difference of others, to understand them, and then understand the complexity of the functioning of the planet Earth. It is important to learn from school onward, to participate in non-conclusive interconvictional dialogue, to open the mind to those people, and then to conduct eventually such dialogue. Finally, to organize, if you are strong enough, non-conclusive interconvictional dialogues on issues concerning the environmental crisis among all people of the planet. Now, relating strategy concerning collective level. Within each identified organization, at all their level of decision-making, you have first to set up or check if they don't exist, the institution allowing for pre-decisional interconvictional dialogue, open to all persons concerned, and to also hold decisional dialogue. That means legally constituted body to make decision, open to those who are mandated to make a decision. So regarding also the collective level, you have then to organize appropriate dialogue in this place in order to identify in the most consensual possible way the problem that directly concern each of this organization and community, the solution to remediate them, and the problem impacting several of this organization and communities, and also those concerned by this problem. Because then you can go to identifying agencies and community, inter-agencies and inter-community to create them if they don't exist at each of the relevant operational levels. So you have the different agencies, but now you have organisms, inter-agency and inter-community. And then to set up within this body, the institution and space for pre-decisional and decisional interconvictional dialogue. Again, to analyze the problems submitted to them, possibly identify others, elaborate solutions. And what is important is that each level should refer to the next level. For instance, at the problem of a city, if it is much larger than a city, it should go at the state, much higher, and so on. So, what does the diplomat job involve? How does this concern diplomacy? For me, I think that the job of diplomat is to carry out the necessary consultation and confrontation to build a compromise, and to find and propose solutions acceptable to all parties involved in a conflict or a common project, taking into account the interest and project of each party. And therefore, to achieve this, interconvictional process is very well suited, because by holding pre-decisional interconvictional dialogue to be conducted within each party, then you can prepare within each country, for instance, the decision-making interconvictional dialogue by proposing many solutions which are available and acceptable in your own country. And then this pre-decision which are available can be discussed within own country in the decision-making interconvictional dialogue. So this is a diplomatic process, I think, but more likely to be successful if each of the persons involved has gained experience in such dialogue with the necessary attitude and skill. This is why at the level of individual, it is so important to work and understand this way of discussing. So what direction should diplomacy take today? It's a very hard question, so I will propose that interconvictional process be a tool for diplomacy. And in order to make it really aware, it should be applied from school onward to train them, each person, in the attitude and skill needed in both diplomacy and life. And secondly, they should be implemented, this process, within nations to solve problems specific to each nation, and in international meetings to solve international problems. So what direction should diplomats take today? I mean that each diplomat involved must have a good perception of the complexity of the crisis. It's a very complex crisis to be aware of its constraint, as well as the constraints of each country, but also of the strong sensibility of what happened to the climate. And there is what we call the so-called papillon, I don't remember, effect. A small effect somewhere can generate big effect outside in the world.
The butterfly effect.
Yes, exactly. In order to take into account inequality of countries in the cause and effect of the crisis. This is not because you have a solution that the solution is the best. You take into account the difference in the economic situation of their inhabitants, but also difference in culture and in the way of apprehending the problem. From my experience at International Space University, I discovered that you have many, many ways to approach a problem, and this has to be taken into account. There are obviously many other elements to take into account. So, following interconvictional process, allowing each country to understand what each country thinks and feels about this treaties, to take into account each other culture and history problem and assets, and understand the ins and outs of the solution envisaged. For me, this should be the main goal of a diplomacy of dialogues. And this interconvictional process should lead to search for the global common good by taking into account the common good of each country in mutual respect, by implying for each country an analysis of its action within itself and at the international level. So thank you for listening to me, and let's have now an interconvictional debate together.
François, thank you so much. And, I should point out to everybody that François is the first person to have used this term and interjected it into discourse. And it's a great honor, François, to have you with us today and to get us started in the manner that you have. So thank you so much. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, and that is Rafael Tyszblat. Rafael is the founding leader of Connecting Actions and the European Institute for Dialogue, two NGOs focused on providing platforms for interconvictional organizations to create networks across Europe. An expert in conflict resolution, mediation, intercultural, and interconvictional dialogue, Rafael has trained thousands of youth and adults in effective communication skills via his work with the nonprofit organization Solia. He joins us today from Paris. Welcome, Rafael.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for continuing to be such a great professor, mentor, and an advocate of our field. It's been a rough year for the entire world, and it's hard to keep balance sometimes, and it's been hard for citizen diplomats as well, transprofessional diplomats specifically, to take stock of the super complex reality that François was also mentioning earlier, and that is evolving under our eyes, and it's hard to find also their own place in this complex reality. So I just wanted to start by mentioning a couple of things in terms of context. First, obviously, the pandemic, its implications on absolutely all aspects of life, and the restrictions that forced most of us to be on pause for a year and a half now. We've had to transform face-to-face dialogue, a dialogue whose direct communication aspect is something we value highly, into an online mediated dialogue. And of course, we're lucky enough that technology enables us to continue to operate and reach out to people online, and incidentally to stop from aggravating the environment because of the flight traffic we usually contribute to create in our conferences and gatherings. You also have the issue of truth and facts, etc., and the lack of trust towards authorities, scientists, science engineers, the media, the institutions, etc., which is sometimes understandable and sometimes delusional. And so the question comes: what is the role of citizen diplomacy and dialogue in that regard? Then you have also the whole relationship between the West and the Muslim world, which is something that concerns much of my work. The US catastrophic intervention in Afghanistan, followed by a chaotic withdrawal process, proves that if there was ever a need to prove that foreign interventions to eradicate a political force or to impose democracy onto people are doomed to fail. And it also shows that, again, when countries are destabilized, people will do anything to save their lives, to go to places where life seems possible. So migration waves are not going to stop, and that's also going to affect our work. I'm not going to even mention, the nuclear proliferation risks and, what the escalation that's going on in the Pacific right now, which is so frightening. And then you have global warming and environmental challenges that may affect not just migrations, but our mortality, our nativity, our consumption behaviors, our cultures. And so I think that, in that context, I think transprofessional diplomacy and citizen interconvictional dialogue in particular have never been so needed. We need to make sense of all of this, and we need to be in sync with reality a little more. And we need to be ready to cooperate to tackle those common challenges, whether it be the degrading environment or the weakening of democracy and social cohesion. But we have all those immense challenges ahead of us. And a lot of us citizen diplomats are asking ourselves, what is our relevance and where would we be most relevant in that regard? When I look, to be very frank, I was thinking about the theme of this panel and this conference. And when I look at the environmental task, I personally don't think that I'm doing much to help preserve the environment. As a citizen, first, I still rely too much on consuming goods and activities that are, that have negative externalities, including pollution. And then as a professional, as a citizen diplomat, as a dialogue practitioner, my focus has been the identity divide, not the environmental issue, which doesn't mean that, I haven't touched on the topic. On the contrary, there's, the environment is one of the most pressing issues nowadays. And so it is also what the participants I gather talk a lot about. So through connecting actions, through the Muslim Jewish Conference, or otherwise in other capacity, through Solia, my work with Solia, I've supported initiatives that create joint awareness and networks of collaboration also for environmental initiatives. I have facilitated encounters between influential Middle Eastern leaders and socioeconomic actors that aim at reinforcing different kinds of projects, including in the environmental sector. At Solia, which is an NGO that organizes online dialogues between young people, I've also led or facilitated different dialogues around carbon reduction or the preservation of the environment. And those are amazing because they enable groups of people who never get to meet to not just break down stereotypes and build relationships, but also to share ideas and feel a common sense of responsibility to improve their impact. And there's also a couple of projects I know that are in the making in the Middle Eastern region, which is perhaps one of the most acutely aware region, in terms of the environmental challenges that they face. And in this region, you have networks of collaboration involving Israelis, Palestinians, and neighboring countries around such issues as water or solar energy, for instance. You have the Arava Institute. I just want to mention a couple because they exist and they are true transprofessional diplomacy initiatives. The Arava Institute, which is the Joint Israeli-Palestinian Research Institute, has a center for transboundary water management that provides a platform for regional water professional and policymakers from the region to cooperate in water conservation, desalinization, wastewater treatment, and education. You have also an organization that's called EcoPeace, which is a joint Jordanian, Israeli, Palestinian do tank that brings together professionals from those countries to create shared solutions, educate local constituents, and advocate for ecological policies. So you have some of those initiatives, and what's great is that they don't just do this work, they also contribute to a sort of a paradigm shift, which is a very much needed paradigm shift, which considers that those common resources actually provide great opportunities for peace because they require collaboration. So in a sense, the fact that the threat is shared and urgent is also an opportunity for transprofessional diplomacy. So now you may ask, are those types of initiatives enough, given the challenge? The strategies to address the environmental crisis, I think, have to be holistic. It needs to involve all stakeholders, which is in this case is virtually everybody, because everybody is a stakeholder there. It's not like other issues. This is about survival. And let's face it, doing dialogue among different faith-based community is a luxury. It has always been, but now that our political systems show so much fragility, you have the common environmental threat, we're realizing this more than ever. It is a luxury. And maybe, the reflection that happens sometimes among practitioners is that, maybe the urgency of the environmental crisis is calling for something more drastic. Maybe we should have, all citizen diplomats stop what they're doing and instead join the troops of, those who just advocate for carbon emission reductions, for instance. I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe we should stop just yet, for different reasons. One, there's a lot of possible synergies between what citizen diplomats or transprofessional diplomats do and what environmental activists are doing or have been doing. And there needs to be more such collaboration. The second thing is that, in such a divided world, the world is more divided than ever, I think. And I think that in that context, dialogue has never been more needed to bridge those divides and allow us to finally act together. I mentioned the issue of facts and truth. We know, for instance, that global warming and its human origin is still today is a disputed fact. And so when facts are disputed, I think the only dialogue has a chance to help us reach a common understanding of truth, which is why it's so important. And then maybe the last thing is that I think that fostering a culture of dialogue and cooperation has never been more indispensable. If you look at some of the the high-level negotiation of the last 30 years, the Kyoto Protocol, the various conferences of parties, for instance, the main reason for the lack of ambition of those agreements is that the processes that led them were not efficient enough. And I think that citizen diplomats and dialogue practitioners and consensus builders have the knowledge, the skills, the tools to make the most out of those high-level negotiations that need to happen, but they need to be better accompanied and have a better process. To not just find mildly satisfying compromises, but to build a consensus that is real, genuine, ambitious, and sustainable. And François gave some interesting elements about this. So I think state diplomats really better start looking at those tools and processes if they want to get out of agreements that stick to the lowest common denominator in terms of state interests. So holistic dialogue is needed. And it's needed also because politics in a broad sense, and diplomacy in particular, is no longer considered to be a matter of governments. Citizens understand it belongs to them now. So it's not surprised, I think, if private citizen level diplomatic initiatives have boomed in the last 2 decades. But I think that in order to be taken seriously as a credible alternative, or as a complement rather, to classic diplomacy, the actors of citizen diplomacy need to do a few things. First, they need to go out there and write, explain the process and the processes that they follow. Show proof of concept, in a sense. Show that what they do is scientifically supported, that it works for a reason. They need to train as well. Dialogue is not just what you do out of good intentions. It doesn't work just like that. And so you need to get ready to, tackle extremely difficult dynamics and extremely complex processes, like, again, what François was saying, involving high numbers of stakeholders. And then finally, I think they need to unite. They need to, freedom of initiative is good, and there's so many different types of initiatives, and those different types enrich each other. But you also need to join forces. When you have extremists and fundamentalists that are so good at organizing, and when you have the environmental threat that is soon going to affect us all, we need to strengthen our field by working more together. And so, I have no way to tell you that the citizen diplomacy will succeed in effectively addressing all the environmental issues that we're facing. Things are, again, very, very complex. We also need to expand our reach. Most dialogues I'm aware of involve a big but limited part of the world. We need to reach out to more Chinese people, for instance. I'm not aware of citizen diplomatic initiatives involving Chinese people in high numbers, and that needs to change. I may be wrong, by the way, but I'm not aware of them. You need to involve the whole of the West. You need to involve the whole of Asia to start with, and you need to involve producers and consumers, because I very much believe that the environmental crisis is a crisis of consumption as well. So we're talking about a change of culture here. In history, changes of culture have taken sometimes hundreds of years to take place, or have been very violent. And citizen diplomacy through generalized dialogue, I think, can provide a third way to create that cultural shift that we need in a fairly rapid manner, but in a non-violent way. And so I think this is what we professionals need to work on now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafael. I really appreciate hearing from the perspective of not only a practitioner of dialogue, but a teacher of dialogue. And I think that your work and the way that you convey the necessity for us to present proof of concept for what we're doing is, I think, something that we all need to work on together to be able to language in our respective contexts, because of course, proof of concept is received in different ways among different people. And so thank you so much for that wonderful contribution. Now we turn to our final speaker for this panel, and that is Parin Begum. She is a broadcast journalist with the BBC based in Lancashire, United Kingdom. She's a longtime member of the Vienna-based Muslim-Jewish Conference and has led multiple interfaith, youth, and community development initiatives in the UK. In addition to her international work in interfaith dialogue, Parin is involved with local organizations that support the development of community cohesion to address issues of racial and religious prejudice. Parin joins us today from Blackburn. Welcome, Parin.
Hello, thank you for having me here, David, and everyone else. It's good to be here, and it's been brilliant to hear some of the speeches that we've already heard as well. We've got some brilliant panelists, and it's a hard one to follow, but I'm going to try my best as well. So I think, as Rafael also mentioned as well, there's been some difficulties in the interconvictional work and interfaith work in modern times because of the pandemic. But I think for myself personally as well, being involved in interfaith work, it has changed for me over the years, as it naturally would with the development of more diverse, plural and a multicultural society and all the challenges that come with it, especially with the post 9/11 era. The social environment has suffered. I would say like religious prejudice, nationalism, etc. was very common. Faith communities were often targets. So we saw a need for interconvictional work or interfaith work. So at the beginning, when I was first involved with interfaith work around 10 years ago, I was dealing with a lot of work between faith communities. So less often would we get people from non-faith backgrounds involved. So it was a lot of work between like the church and the mosque, or youth level social activities between young Muslims and Christians and Jews. And it was easier because we often, in the age where religious prejudice was common, I think faith communities found comfort in one another. So we've had to change the way we work. For example, with the organization that I was currently working with, it's called the Blackburn with Darwin Interfaith Forum, which is the town that I'm based. One of the things that we used to arrange are workshops with schools that involved a speakers panel. So we'd have a speakers panel with 6 faith representatives from the world mainstream religions. So Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and there's one missing, Judaism. Did I mention Judaism? Yeah, Judaism. So we had faith reps from these religions, these mainstream religions, and we didn't have anybody from a non-faith background, which we saw. Children would often ask questions as well. They would ask questions aimed at someone who doesn't affiliate with a specific religion. So we saw a need to change and modify our practice over the years. So especially with the growth of globalization, secularization, and new age and postmodern thoughts, the visibility of the feminist movement as well, or the progression of LGBTQI communities as well. We saw, things were changing, and we had to change our practice as well to be better diplomats as well. So interfaith work had to change to kind of meet those challenges that come with them. Especially living in the UK, sometimes you could say religious communities are often undermined, or you could say, they're seen as not compatible with contemporary ideals, or conflicting with feminist thoughts, or conflicting with the LGBTQI community. So we saw that there was already a need to meet those challenges and address those challenges as well. Something maybe a traditional approach of interfaith work hasn't dealt with before in my community. Well, I believe that religion and diplomacy have been soulmates all along, and they've been, engaged in postmodern connection. So in order to kind of meet those challenges, we've had to do a lot of growing and educating ourselves as well, and how we modify our practice to represent more people from different convictional backgrounds or beliefs, even if they might not align with the traditional approach. For example, with the Blackburn Darwin Interfaith Forum, so besides the main faith reps, the 6 faith reps that I mentioned earlier, we also invited people who do not belong to a faith background, who don't identify with a specific religion, to join us as well, so that we are meeting the questions. When we have the question panel, for example, we're meeting the questions of people from a faith background who are asking questions to a person who don't belong to a certain faith as well. So we are including all ideas and being collective as well. Also, even when I got involved with the Muslim Jewish conference with Rafael a few years back, I encountered something special as well. We had participants, I think over 100 participants from many backgrounds. Even though it's called Muslim Jewish conference, we have participants from faith that do not belong to just Islam and Judaism, or we had participants who don't identify with the faith. But also equally, we had participants who identified with one of the LGBTQI strands, and they joined us whether they were religious or non-religious, but they were equally passionate about the work within this field. So we had the opportunity to exchange a lot of shared practice. And this was special because often here in my community, people often think these two, like the religious community and the LGBTQI communities, are often irreconcilable. So it only encouraged me to inspire some of the thoughts in my practice and develop my diplomatic work. And of course, with globalization and the changing nature of conflict, we can see there are new conflicts that are often emerging, and we have to always change our practice and ideas to meet those challenges as well. But that all comes part of diplomacy, I believe. So we're still working together to kind of develop new ways of practicing diplomatic work. So I think there have been some useful strategies as well for promoting collaboration among different practitioners. I think this field is already quite complex. So when you get people from a vast range of beliefs who are trying to address environmental crisis, it was easier to identify the key and the basic things that we all need or desire and go from there. For example, I believe there are some basic things that we all, despite our backgrounds, that we all need. So maybe food, including water, shelter, and clothing. So recognizing that we can all coexist in this planet. And despite our differences, despite our differences on how we came to Earth and how we're going to leave the Earth, we can collaborate and negotiate with one another on how we can successfully engage so that we can meet our basic needs while fulfilling our collective and our individual convictions. So if you're a person of faith, you can be given the remit to practice your faith without your basic needs being compromised. And likewise for a person of no faith. And I think the basic example, or basically if we just kind of develop, and I know it's very simplified, but I think if we look at a broader context, we can see what are the things that unite us, or what are the things the shared ideals that we can work on, so that we can start from there, start on what are the shared values that we all share, or what are the principles that we all share, and working on diplomacy through that route. I found that there are two different approaches that work when it comes to diplomacy. So there's obviously the traditional dialogue exchange, having a discussion about your different beliefs, understanding them. But there are also other aspects to it as well, where you look at things that kind of bring people together. So often we found that in Muslim Jewish conference, in my own local practice as well, three things that always bring people together are music, food, and sport. So, even when we were discussing, or we were having debates about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and during the day in the Muslim Jewish conference, at night we will, party the night away and, share our love for music and dancing to kind of have that dialogue as well, and have a greater understanding of one another, seeing that, trying to break down, I think the idea is to break down that wall of us versus them. So humanizing people from different convictions to allow us to know them beyond their beliefs or their convictions, to see them as individuals. And I've often found that this worked, especially in schools as well, when we did the traditional, these are the different religions and we want to know everything about them and understand them. But when we discussed the ideals of, what are the things that we all have in common? What are the things that we all share? We all want good education. We want a healthy life. We want, the basic needs for healthy water, environment, caring for the environment, on all the challenges that come with it, and all the other issues that are beyond just our convictions and our beliefs. What are the things that our society share? So even in school events, when we did workshops about stereotypes, we'll discuss those stereotypes, but later on we'll have sports events, for example, between, like, say, the Christian faith schools and Islamic faith schools, and this often kind of facilitate opportunities where healthy conversations can be fostered within a safe domain. So that often helped. And we have workshops getting people from different convictional backgrounds to discuss issues on climate or climate issues or the environmental issues. So then they're not just focusing on what makes us different. We're talking about what are the things that can bring us together, what are the things that we can work on together or collaborate on together to to kind of go beyond that environmental crisis. So so when you think of diplomacy, you're thinking, well, I was thinking, initially, like, it's maybe, the state visits or the international diplomacy that you have the traditional idea of. But I think in my line of work, you can consider interfaith work or interconventional work as diplomacy, because for me, that means to represent or negotiate a group or a cause that mediate between different groups. And I believe in interfaith work, that's exactly what we're doing, where it doesn't mean you have to compromise your own identity or your own faith to negotiate with other people. You can still be your own true self, your own true to your principles, but also work with other people, collaborate with other people who are different to you, just so you can kind of mitigate the challenges that come with all the environmental crises that we see today. So I think the way I see it is there are certain etiquettes to diplomacy. So I think you can apply them in different areas. You can, even as a journalist, I consider myself as a diplomat as a journalist, as an interfaith worker. As a student, you can consider yourself as a diplomat. I think through the etiquettes that you kind of apply as a diplomat, such as the listening skills or certain coded gestures or empathy, having just the shared value for empathy and the whole collaborative togetherness, we can all consider ourselves in some way in our profession as a diplomat. But I think going forward in order to address the challenges that come with our current environmental crisis. There are certain things that need to be addressed or grow. I think, we often, especially in the UK, where as history kind of implies, the religion and state are often separated, and so religion is not often it's included in foreign policy, but to a certain degree, when maybe we're talking about national security. But I think as a lot of there are still a large number of the community that identify with a certain faith, so we should still consider religion, faith-based diplomacy and religion as going hand in hand. So I think we need to understand religion as a backbone for cultural identity or social engagement and human development in some areas, and I think that way we can go from there to meet some of the environmental crisis, especially recognizing the role of religion in affecting political behavior to resolve conflict in some areas. So faith-based diplomacy can be a useful tool for a creative, like, foreign policy, taking into consideration all the influential role that some religious institutions have played around the world in issues, global affairs, for economic growth, in tackling terrorism, etc. So I think one of the challenges facing global diplomacy is to fully understand and engage the great impact that a wide range of religions have on foreign affairs, and kind of what Rafael said as well, kind of training more people to be active citizens in faith-based diplomacy, as well as in other areas as well. I think that's all from me, because I know we are very short on time at the moment, aren't we? So I'll stop there, but I'll take any questions later on as well if considered. Thank you very much.
Parin, thank you very much. And I just love how you were able to bring people into the rooms of the Muslim Jewish Conference and to hear about some of the very practical ways that people can engage in discourse and dialogue and receive each other's stories by shared activities. And sometimes I think we speak so much about theory and concepts, when in fact, when I look at the organizations that everybody in this room are involved in, that one of the foundational acts is creating friendship networks that people can work from, and I'm so honored to be a part of those networks with you. So this leads me to want to ask all of you a question, and I'm wondering if I could pose this question and then ask people to respond in the order that we have had you speak so far. So first François, then Rafael, and then Parin. And so the question I have is, what do you think we can best convey an invitation to others to see that interconvictional work offers opportunities outside of interfaith circles to a much wider audience? And I wanted to tell you that when I had the honor of attending the Connecting Actions gathering in Paris, which laid the foundations for the creation of the European Institute for Dialogue, I was struck by how powerful this concept of interconvictional dialogue and relations really are. And I have to say, for my own small part, I want to make this word a part of diplomatic studies discourse, because I think that while it clearly has emerged in the interfaith world, particularly in Europe, which among people who want to be inclusive of their secular neighbors and family members, I just think there is a much bigger role for it to play in a lot of wider circles. And I'm just wondering how you think we can disseminate this information to a larger audience so that people can take this word and take ownership of it and apply it in their own contexts.
Thank you, David, for this question. It's really a very important question and difficult to answer. What we propose is really, why not to organize in association which is not religious, to propose dialogues on key issues regarding the climate and the environmental crisis, to discuss some key points all the people are interested in. You can also, this is what happens in France, you can also within school, even from the secondary school, some teacher might ask the class as a whole to have a debate on a key issue, maybe first regarding the class, so that they learn to discuss together with different convictions. And then why not a typical project regarding the crisis at the level of the children. This is the first. Second point, you have many also neutral organizations where people meet in different configuration. And I think here, some of the people interested and convinced, by the way, to hold and to conduct an interconvictional dialogue should be done. But as you said, you have to be aware, and Rafael insisted on that conducting an interconvictional dialogue is something which is not so easy, because the tendency is that each individual participating to such dialogue, one have the temptation to really judge the other and say, well, you are wrong, I am right, etc. No, you have to listen people, learn to listen people, to accept to be contradicted, and then find a way to define a compromise. We say in G3I, a compromise without compromission. That means that we can arrive at a decision which is not against fundamental conviction of all the participants. Well, the technique is not so simple, and Rafael knows that. And I think we should now start by doing this. It is not by only speaking of, but just making such a dialogue at a different level. At university, students might be also can do that. There are many occasions to organize debates within student organization, and then they can do it. And after they go in the profession, why not in some, not only in parish, or why not in parish or in a religious organization? Why don't you ask each one to invite friends who are not necessarily part of the religion, and then start with them dialogues, etc., etc. So it's, I think it's a lengthy process and not so obvious. I can agree with you. It's not obvious, but I agree that we have to start very, very rapidly that.
Thank you so much, François. Rafael.
Yeah, no, it is one of the most central questions that our field faces. How to expand our reach, and especially how to open the perception of what interfaith work is, and to start using basically this word of interconvictional a little bit more, because it is more inclusive. When I entered that field, about 10 years ago, interfaith dialogue specifically, because that was the word that we were using most often. I define myself as a secular or agnostic Jew, and so when I first entered that field, I had myself some reservations. I wasn't sure this was right for me, because I was not a practicing Jew, and I was not an expert in religion at all. But then I discovered that there was indeed a place for me, for people like me, and that as Parin said, in the Muslim Jewish Conference, for instance, you have people from different faiths, of different levels of faith, and sometimes atheists as well. And so, and there was absolutely no issue with that, because the subjects that we were speaking of concerned us as citizens, not necessarily just as religious people. And so we need to communicate more about that. We need to break down stereotypes about our field. And that means that we need, just like François was saying, we need to foster that culture of dialogue, make people understand that this is about dialogue. It's not about religion. It's about bridging different worldviews, whether those worldviews are based on faith or on other values or convictions. So that's one. And I would say, regarding what François was saying, we need to make people understand that it's not about, me being right and you being wrong. It's about listening. Yes, and at the same time, I would say, I think one of the keys to expand the outreach of our work is to help people understand that actually the main value for them in entering those spaces of dialogue is not about listening to others. It is about being listened to. A lot of us, want to say what we believe in. We want to express and scream on social media and everywhere else, what we think and how we think the world should be. And everybody is doing that. And nobody is listening because everybody else wants to get their point across. And so the real value of those spaces that we create, interconvictional spaces, is that you will, if you want to say something, you will have an audience. You will have people who will actually truly listen to you. And that really feels good. And that really, makes you think that, you have a chance to put your point across. In the process, of course, when you enter that space, you will also get to listen to other points of views. But I think that the main message that we need to convey to people who are reluctant to enter into dialogue spaces is that the main thing is that in those spaces you will get to have your point heard and listened to, and I think that may entice people to try those spaces and leave out the social media spaces where it's just it's very frustrating type of communication that happens all the time, where we want to show that there can be a different type of engagement and communication and relationship building in the spaces that we create.
Thank you so much, Rafael. Parin.
Thank you. I think they actually put that together quite beautifully. I think, as mentioned in my speech as well, it's been reaching out to a wider community and extending our reach has been one of my greatest challenge, especially in my hometown, and as mentioned in my speech as well, all the challenges that come with it. And 10 years ago, as Rafael said as well, I also had a problem with the word interfaith as well, because I feel like it didn't meet what I was trying to do. When you thought of interfaith, you get connotations of people maybe sharing scriptures, religious scriptures, or visiting the different religious institutions, which is what traditionally we did in my organization. This is that we provided mosque visits, church visits, and we did dialogue exchange between different faith communities, and that's okay. That is also equally important. But I think when I was looking at the environmental crisis in front of me, I was thinking of, as Rafael said as well, as citizens, how we can address those challenges that we are facing with the rise of religious prejudice or negative stereotypes or marginalization of certain minority groups. So when I did speak to you, David, as well, I really like this word interconvictional. I'll admit it's not a word that I had come across in my field of work before. And when we had a conversation about it and I researched it further, and I thought I like this term because it is about including and having space for people from different convictions. And I think over the years, we did trial and error on what works, on what doesn't work when we're trying to extend our reach, especially in a community where, especially amongst my age group, we don't have a very large religious age group. So even when we were organizing events or workshops, when they looked at the word interfaith, it was instantly a put off for people to join, because again, they would just associate it with is it a spiritual event or a religious event? So one of the, like I mentioned in my speech as well, some of the key things that we focused on was, what are the things that bring people together? How can we provide a space where we can invite people from all backgrounds to have a conversation, to have a healthy dialogue, to tackle stereotypes, to address some challenges that come with understanding different religious groups or non-religious groups. So some of the key things we took away were things like sports or music or food is the key thing as well. Some of those things we kind of incorporated in our practice to invite people from different backgrounds. Or we made the young people host a charity event, for example, for the refugees, and that was people from different religious backgrounds, different convictions, organizing a charity event together. So they're working on a cause together, so that they're collaborating together. And in the midst of all that organizing, they are having conversations, they are understanding one another, they are looking at a person as a human beyond their faith, or beyond whatever backgrounds they come from, looking at them beyond their appearance, for example, and doing things together. We found that it helped to foster dialogue, it helped to foster safe space for healthy dialogues. And I think going forward, that's something we're going to adopt a lot more in our practice. Not only that, I think even looking at the Muslim Jewish conference, for example, being a residential event, I found that when I came back and I hosted residential events to the like of Muslim Jewish conference on a smaller scale, we didn't have 100 participants from all over the globe, but we had people from our region coming together in a residential trip to have team activities, having discussions, having debates, and that often worked because young people saw it as an opportunity that, oh, I'm going away for a while and I get to make new friends and meet different people, and that also, I think, helps, even though they probably didn't have the same intention that we had at the beginning. But at the end of it, we saw that it was successful because people spent time together over the few days, and they had conversations in between. They cooked together, they worked together, they were working on things together and collaborated on shared practices and everything. So it really helped in the long run. Yeah, so I think those are some of the things, some of the ways that I would suggest to extend your reach. But I'm sure there are other ideas as well, and I'd welcome them. And if you have ideas as well, I'd welcome them as well going forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Parin. We have a question that's come in from one of our master's students. And before I share it, I want to share with you a story that I think illustrates what I think might be the potential of the environmental crisis to take the work that you're doing to a broader audience. As you may or may not know, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and there was a rather extraordinary organization founded in Portland, Oregon, called the Western Rivers Conservancy. And this was a group of people that was begun by a group of environmental scientists who were concerned about the integrity of the many rivers of the Pacific Northwest, upon whose integrity people rely for their lives and their livings. And these scientists determined that in order to preserve these rivers, they needed to acquire the land on either side of the rivers so that people couldn't build on that land or have access to dumping pollutants into it. But they lacked the capital to do so. And I could tell you that these environmental scientists, for the most part, were politically progressive people. So what they ended up doing is that they created a bridge to the business community of businessmen, many of whom were quite conservative, but who also loved the rivers, many of whom were fishermen. So they raised from the business community millions of dollars in order to buy thousands of hectares of land on either side of rivers throughout the Northwest. And I was struck by the fact that I'm certain that a number of the business people who contributed that money voted straight Republican on the tickets, probably a number of Trump supporters, I'm sure. And then the scientists themselves were probably mostly Democrats, but they agreed that the integrity of the river was something that brought them together, a common conviction, if you will. And so I wanted to share that story with you because when I think about what you guys are doing, I just think it has some of the greatest potential to directly address the environmental crisis. And so I'm teeing up all of that to share with you a final question from one of our students. And this comes from Jean-Stéphane Nas. And he asks, you are all involved in fostering spaces for interconvictional dialogue. However, most of these participants, I assume, are at the very least open-minded about building bridges and engaging in interconvictional dialogue. How do you recruit and include people who are less open-minded and more resolute in their convictions? Is it worth it? Is it possible? Let's reverse the order now. Start with Parin, then Rafael, and let's finish with François.
Thank you. That is a very, very good question, actually. And of course, there are people who are not as inclined to cooperate, or they're not as open-minded. I think that is one of the challenges that we face in our field of work. And I think it takes a lot of patience when you're maybe in an event or in a work of field where you are confronted with people like that. But I think the main thing is for you to be open-minded, and be open-minded that not everyone's convinced that they're right. And when you're dealing with conversations with people who are not open-minded, I always ask questions. So like, why do you think this way? Or asking them a lot of questions so that they're also questioning their principles as well, or they're questioning like, why do they think this way? And I try to understand from their viewpoint, or why, if they are closed-minded, why do they feel they have to hold this kind of view, and make them help me understand why they think this way and foster conversations through that. So it is the art of diplomacy, I guess. We have to kind of negotiate and collaborate on our conversations, and often you are going to meet people in this, without doubt, you are going to meet people who are not as open-minded because they believe that their stance is correct and you're incorrect. But I think it just takes a lot of patience, and I just ask a lot of questions. As maybe it's a journalist in me, I don't know, but I always meet these kind of people in my field of work, and I just challenge and have conversations and a healthy discussion. So the key is for you to be open-minded and foster healthy dialogue that way.
Thank you so much, Parin. Rafael.
Right. Yeah, this is a question that ever since I started this field of work, people have asked me. It is indeed, a very central question. Are we, preaching to the choir? Are we trying to convert the converted to interconvictional dialogue and collaboration? You might say that most of those dialogues, yes, involve people who are at least open to the idea of being in interaction with the other. They're not necessarily open to the idea of changing their minds. Not all of them, not all of the participants that I've gathered in the various spaces that I've organized, are completely open-minded. Many of them, come to those spaces with the intention to convince or to represent, at least, represent their convictional group. And so, that means that, that the message that I was mentioning earlier, to say that, you need to come to those spaces to put your point across, is working to some extent. And again, even those who are very open to meeting with the other don't necessarily think while entering those spaces that they're going to change their worldviews. So open-mindedness, has to be taken with a grain of salt as a term, and there are various levels of open-mindedness. And I want to say also that, so to the question, is it worth it, and is it possible? It is possible. But it is also worth it to have dialogues among very open-minded people. Even when you gather dialogues with people who have that open mind, you bring value, because dialogue is not just about breaking down stereotypes and building relationships and you know, improving mutual understanding. It is also about fostering collaboration. And so if you have a group of people who are already open-minded enough to meet the other and maybe even, you know, transform their opinions or their worldviews about certain things, dialogue brings value because that enables them to then, you know, act on that mutual understanding and open-mindedness and do joint initiatives. You know, so you have different levels of values of dialogue in that regard. So even if you don't manage to bring the extremists or the fundamentalists to the table, know that there's a lot that you can do through those spaces with more open-minded people.
Thank you so much, Rafael. François, you have the last word here.
First of all, I thank you for this question. It is really a key question, and I might say that we have this question since the beginning of our work. So important it is. So I think it's really worth thinking at it because we are thinking at it for several years yet. But the solution is very difficult. It depends on many situations. So I think that a way to start with such a conversation, I would say, with such people is just to ask them what they think, to ask their point of view without anything else, and think that we just want to understand what they think about a given topic. That's all, and then within the discussion, we can say, well, you think that, this is what I'm thinking, without, which is very important, and there will not be a question of saying you're right or wrong, and I will just convince you. No, just to say, let's understand what you're thinking. I'm not clear in what you say, so I would be interested to have more information, and also why you are thinking such a thing. And it's very interesting, but maybe as for me, I think that, and maybe after dialogue, if you find some key point of possible action to do, maybe have action together, because the experience shows that making action with people having different conviction and even very strict with their conviction, the fact to see that we can make common action with different conviction is something which is important, because people must understand that we have to learn to live with people with different conviction, and a good way is to do action and see, what can we share something? I don't know, you know, find process, because obviously if you start to say, well, you are not right, you are wrong, you don't understand anything, it's stupid, it will never go anywhere. So you have to be more diplomat. This is a diplomacy work, I think, in approaching this people. Yes, it's very difficult. How to dialogue with someone who refuses dialogue? That's really the fundamental question. And maybe you might be interested. We published what we saw the 10 laws for dialogue. Yes, how you can. Well, I have to translate them into English because they are in French. But anyway, I might try to make an English translation and to forward them to you. No? That's the first response. The second response is that maybe within you have INGO, and this is also for the previous question, in international organization. For instance, in the Council of Europe, there is a NGO conference. And in this conference, you have people from many convictions. And it is very, very interesting that within this organization, you might have open dialogue. And it is interesting that the Council of Europe now is more convinced by interconvictional dialogue more than interreligious dialogue. And you might be interested to read the book I quoted in my written document. I have reference to this white paper of the Council of Europe on intercultural dialogue. And I think it's a very interesting point. I give the reference and the link to download. You can download it from internet. There is an English version, and it's an international document from the Council of Europe. It shows that in international organization, you might have a way to work and speak together, because we ask also this question with Council of Europe. So this is really a good question and not so easy to answer.
Well, François, I would love to have that link, and I would love to share that with our students.
You have it on the document I sent to you.
Oh, the early one. Okay, yes, I do indeed. Then I will look forward to disseminating it, and I will look forward to any further translation of what you're doing that we can share with our students. Well, I think your last point is so well taken, and that even though we might not all share the same convictions, taking action together is one very concrete response to many of the fractures and the concerns that we have about our future of working together. So I cannot think of a better point to end this wonderful conversation on. And so François Becker in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, Rafael Tyszblat in Paris, and Parin Begum in Blackburn. We are so pleased for you to be here, and thank you for taking the action together to join us for this conversation. So at this point in time, we have come to the end of our time together over these 3 days. But before we depart, I want to express my profound gratitude to our amazing group of panelists and keynotes who have joined us from 9 different time zones around the world. And of course, all of our attendees. You've honored us through sharing your time and your wisdom with us so generously. I want to express my deepest gratitude to the extraordinary team of people who have made this conference possible. This includes Noé Cornago, who helped conceive of this conference and who played a leading role in identifying our speakers. I would also like to express my profound thanks to Jeff Wiseman, who has played incredible roles all throughout. The Gray School's inaugural endowed chair in applied diplomacy, who has helped moderate these sessions and brought so much to the table. I also want to thank all of my fellow DePaul faculty members who gave so much of their time, care, and support to make this conference possible. I also want to thank Leah Hasdan for all her advanced work on the logistics of this conference, and our extraordinary IT team, Jessica Bishop-Royce and Reina Nomura. There would be no conference in the absence of this generous and tireless group of people. And finally, I'd like to give my greatest thanks to our students, whose energy, creativity, enthusiasm, and questions, and their desire to work as bridge builders in our world is the real reason that all of us are here today. So in closing, I would like to invite everyone who has joined us here over these last few days to please consider themselves to be a part of our global Gray School cohort. We are so grateful for the opportunity to learn from you and with you, and we look forward to doing so long into the future. We also look forward to welcoming you again to other Gray School events. And if you'd like to learn more about the Gray School, please visit us at our website, las.depal.edu/academics/applied diplomacy. So good afternoon and good evening to all of you. And we look forward to seeing you again soon here in Chicago. Bye-bye now.